name is Beck and welcome to a video where I talk about the worst books I've ever read, according to Goodreads. I've already done my best books read according to Goodreads, so I thought why not close the circle? So these are books that I have not enjoyed at all, but may have decent ratings on Goodreads, so let's jump into my list. The first one that I've written down is not a sequel. Only Human is the book on here, and I got 6 pages into this and then promptly put it down just because the tone was not my vibe at all. So this is supposed to be a first contact with aliens kind of story where the alien pretends to be a human and then learns about humans, and I imagine along the way becomes more humanized. But the way that it was told, it felt very condescending, and so I didn't like the tone of voice, and it just got very tiring and tiresome and frustrating, so I put it straight down. And that one had a 3.64 rating, and I know it's fairly hyped, so the fact that it's got a mid-range and decent rating, it doesn't surprise me, but I generally pick up books that are quite hyped and maybe YA, and then they just turn out not to be my thing. So unfortunately, Only Humans was that for me, and I purchased the book like an idiot. So I've now unhauled it. Coming in next at 3.11, so still fairly mid-range, was Palace of Fires. And I don't remember much of this except that it was a young adult book that felt kind of demonic and kind of sacrificial. And I think it had ritualistic things in it too. And it felt like at the time it was trying to be edgy and just wasn't succeeding. And so I hated it. I don't even know if I finished it, gave it 2 stars or 1 star. I just know that I have a general gross feeling about it when I go back and think about it. So I don't really want to summon that to my thoughts anymore. Still in the mid-range rating at 3.25 is Wink Poppy Midnight. And this felt like the whimsy of the story tried to overtake the characters, to the point where I was like, I don't care about what's happening and I don't really understand why. And it seems like it's supposed to be doing a lot of grand things, but it's not really grounded. So I don't have a point to stick to and then look up at the sky. I feel like I'm floating away and these ideas are not enveloping me at all. I'm kind of just looking at them drift around and there's no foundation for the story. I really didn't like the writing style, and while some people may get lost in this book, I just got frustrated, and I think I actually finished that one as well. So past me just finished stuff that she didn't enjoy, and I think I also gave this a 2 stars. At 3.38, so worryingly now we are climbing, but with Rochelle Mead this makes a lot of sense because she wrote the Vampire Academy books, which I loved as a teenager but can't reread just because I can't stand them anymore, which is a real shame, but that's something entirely different. The other Rochelle Mead book that I'm talking about is Soundless, which is a standalone book by her. It's very short too. I think it's 200 pages. And I remember thinking that I was going to enjoy this because I think it's kind of fantasy themed, but from memory, the ending, I'm not spoiling anything, the ending felt shoehorned. So it didn't really foreshadow anything. And then it came in like, ta-da, here's a conclusion that I've just pulled out of the air because it seems fancy. And so it didn't convince me. I got frustrated at it. And again, I finished a book that I didn't enjoy. So I think at the time I gave that 3 stars, but it didn't make me angry. It just made me disappointed, which is like the ultimate parental thing that people say to you when they're super unimpressed. So because of that, I don't think it's a 3 stars. I think it's probably a 2 now. And then coming in at 3.5, there was this brief time where I picked up a bunch of crime books because I thought, you know, this is a massive genre. Why don't I try it? And this book, I think, matched roughly the Goodreads rating that I gave it. So Goodreads gave it 3.5. I think at the time I gave it around a 3. So of all the books discussed so far, this is probably the closest to the Goodreads rating that I believe matches my taste. The Widow is about a young girl who gets kidnapped. And by young girl, I mean like 6 or 5 years old. So she's playing in her front yard and this guy kidnaps her and the mum is trying to get people to find her again. And it's a very tragic story, and the way that it was told was not convincing, and I predicted the twists and everything. So when it comes to a murder mystery like that, I want to be surprised, I want to be thrilled, and that book just left a sour taste in my mouth rather than me fondly remembering the writing style or anything, or being surprised at it, or remembering how it shocked me in different ways. So I just don't really have a nice memory associated with it. So at the time it was 3 stars, and I tried crime, but that crime book personally just wasn't my thing. So out of all of them so far, at least I'm like, I don't hate this book, but it It just wasn't that great, really. And then we've got an author that I loved the Cherub series for, so that's Robert Muchamore. Cherub is about child spies. Obviously, it's fictional, so all of these kids go to the equivalent of a magical school, but there's no magic. It's set in the UK, and they're basically a faction of MI5 or MI6, and because nobody suspects kids, they are trained up like soldiers and spies and then sent off to do their different missions together. So I loved that kind of format and style, and I like how it created a found family dynamic between all the kids. But then I read Killer T, which I thought, this is going to be incredible because it's a dystopian zombie book by an author that I loved previous work by. And I gave it about a 3 stars, and it just felt like work to read. And Goodreads feels kind of similar. It gave 3.57 as the overall rating, and I'd probably give it 3. It was fine, but it wasn't anything to write home about. I don't know, I guess I was just going into it wishing for different things, and it just didn't stick the landing to me, and it took a long time to get to the ending. So up next is The Hazelwood, and that has a rating of 3.58. This was doing the rounds for a while. I think it was a book featured in some kind of subscription box like Fairy Loot or Owlcrate. I don't know why subscription box is so hard for me to say. Maybe it's the braces. But that one had a lot of hype at the time. And again, it was just another YA fantasy that I didn't really like. For some reason, also, it just got very cloudy, so there goes my lighting. But we're going to soldier on. But it was a story that felt fairy tale-esque. I think it was about a girl whose mother had disappeared or passed away, and so she was going back to an old estate to kind of find some answers. And when she went back to this old estate, she got sucked into this parallel or fairy tale world. Here's the thing, I'm not really into retellings, so I didn't know that going into The Hazelwood. And the way it reads is very fairy tale-esque. And so when it came to connecting to the tone of the book, I felt alienated because I don't usually reach for fairy tales. I don't know what it is, I just don't like it. So because it had that whimsy to it, probably similar to Wink Poppy Midnight, it had that whimsy going for it. And Wink Poppy Midnight, I think, is magical realism, so that makes a lot of sense. And this one was just a fantasy. So it wasn't my thing either. So I disagree with Goodreads. It's not the 3.57 rating or whatever it is, 3.58. I disagree. I think it was 3 or lower. Then we've got White Sand by Brandon Sanderson, his graphic novel, because I loved the prose version, but the graphic novel was just not where I was at. Partly that's my fault because the style it's drawn in really reminds me of old style superhero comics, and I'm not into that style, and I prefer something a bit more, I hesitate to say something a bit more artistic because that feels rude, but also I just want something not like Saga, but Saga and Lore Olympus and even Heartstopper, all of them have their individual styles that manage to communicate depth and detail and color and just different layouts to make you feel like you're part of its individual story. Whereas with White Sand, it just felt very static, and it didn't feel like the graphics married up with the writing. It felt like it was very writing heavy, and so transitioning into a graphic novel, things felt like they were missing. So I just didn't get the grand scheme of Brandon's world building. So while this is 3.63 on Goodreads, I gave it about a 3 stars. It felt okay, but I just wanted more, especially because Brandon Sanderson is one of my favorite authors. So it just didn't hit the mark for me, but I'm really happy that we have the prose version. So I'm just going to let that satisfy me, and I'm probably not going to continue with the graphic novels, mostly also because they are really expensive and hardcover, and I cannot afford that. Now we have 3 more, and the third last is by an author that I've really enjoyed in the past, Sylvain Neuvel, and he wrote a novella called A History or The History of What Comes Next, and this is a sci-fi but set in modern day, and it's historical, so historical sci-fi. I don't know what I'm talking about with modern day, just ignore me. So it's about the space race, and so we're covering different technological leaps, but we're also following these characters who seem to be kind of reincarnated women that are fighting for the survival of the human race. And I think they're aliens. So based on the way I felt about the story, it didn't feel like these characters were necessary for all of the historical events to occur, even though it seemed like they were intrinsically involved in making those events happen. So it didn't match up for me, and the characters just weren't convincing. There was also some male characters set against the female characters that were also reincarnations. And so it was kind of like this long-standing rivalry or feud to the point where they try and kill each other off so that one side can benefit and then the other side will die. So it's this long-standing cat and mouse game that's generational, and there's aliens and also sci-fi. I don't know, it just wasn't very convincing. But Goodreads disagrees with me because they give it 3.63 and I think I gave it 2 stars. So my taste is clearly not matching up with Goodreads. Now for the last two, one of them is Daughter of the Burning City, and that is a fantasy young adult book, and it follows a girl who can make copies or clones of herself, I think, and there are characters in this world, a part of this circus, that are all supernatural kind of inclined. So they obviously have different abilities. All of these different characters are kind of like a found family, and then one day the clone or one of the copies of this girl gets murdered, and so they're trying to figure out who the murderer is. I think I gave it 2 stars at the time. I don't know what it is, but it just felt not developed enough for me. I don't agree with the rating on Goodreads. The rating says 3.69, and I think I gave it probably a 2, a 2.5. If I was generous in the past, maybe I gave it 3. But I think this is probably in the phase when I was edging out of YA and going more into adult fantasy that was longer, and so it gave it more space to become deeper and more detailed. But speaking of, maybe I'm going to contradict my previous statement, because the last book on this list is an adult fantasy and I hated it. I gave it 1 star, and Goodreads gives it 3.66, so I thoroughly, wholeheartedly disagree, and the book I'm going to talk about is Godblind, I think by Anna Stevens. There is such a graphic scene in here of torture about a nail going up somebody's, and it was awful, and it was just put in there as like torture porn. The rest of the book also wasn't that great. There are so many characters that feel like they've done a slapdash. It's like there is this character kind of like this stereotype and they're not really developed, and then we jump to somebody else, and it all felt very quick, not very grounded, and just amped up in the chaoticness. And so it felt like it was going for that edgy tone, and it fell very short for me. I don't know if I finished it. I must have, because in the past I got it for a review. I think I wrote a review that was probably very scathing. I haven't gone back and read it on my blog when I used to blog. So with that 1-star rating, that is the end of this video. And clearly I have strong opinions, and Goodreads is like, nah, everything's fine. So let me know what the worst book that you've read this year is. I would like to know, and whether it aligns with Goodreads or not. But thank you so much for watching this video. I'll come chat with you down below in the comments, and I'll see you in my next video. Bye.